Okay, this is part 2 of my video on gravity's rainbow, part 2 of 3, and if you haven't seen the first part, I'll link it in the description. We got all kinds of stuff going on in this book, dehumanization of war, loss of innocence, elite versus preterite. Just that's the tip of the iceberg there. So we're going to continue on with a lot of those themes in this part 2 video. One quick thing, my number one fan was watching the last video and they told me, I don't really, even with you explaining some stuff, the plot doesn't really make sense to me. And plot is never a huge focus in my videos, but especially with Gravity's Rainbow, with the plot that's so scattered and diffuse and, let's be honest, difficult to understand even if you've read the whole book. I just decided that I wasn't really gonna make an attempt at summarizing the plot for each excerpt. So I try to give a little context, but yeah, the plot is definitely not something that can be understood easily, especially not by watching my videos. But that being said, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to get started on the second batch of quotes. There's quite a few, as you can see. Jumping right in. Well, not right in, I had an intro. Jumping in, we have here Mr. Pointsman and Thomas Gwenhidwy. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but they are two scientists who work together. I mentioned Pointsman in the last video. He's a Pavlovian, deals with stimulus and response. So this is a conversation that they're having on Christmas Day. If you'll remember, the last quotes that I ended with had some characters on Christmas Eve, so this is not too far after that. We're on Christmas Day. What if we're all Jews, you see, all scattered like seeds, still flying outward from the primal fist so long ago? Man, I believe that. Of course you do, Gwenhidwy. Aren't we then? What about you? I don't know. I don't feel Jewish today. I meant flying outward. He means alone and forever separate. Pointsman knows what he means. So, by surprise, something in him is touched. He feels the Christmas snow now at crevices of his boots, the bitter cold trying to get in, the brown wool flank of Gwenhidwy, moving at the edge of his sight, a pocket of color, a holdout against this whitening day. Flying outward, flying. Gwenhidwy, a million ice points falling in a slant across his caped immensity, looking so improbable of extinction that now, from where it's been lying, the same yawing, drunk, chattering fear returns, the curse of the book, and here is someone he wants, truly, with all his mean heart, to see preserved. Though he's been too shy or proud to've ever smiled at Gwenhidwy without some kind of speech to explain and cancel out the smile. It's a little strange, without context. Here they're referring to Jews as generally a diaspora. If you don't know, a diaspora means a scattered community. Right? So in the world there is a Jewish diaspora, right? The Jews who came from the Middle East are all around the world now, right? There's an African diaspora, and you have certain countries who were through the slave trade or migration are now scattered across the world. So that's what diaspora means. And the central question that Gwenhidwy's asking here is all of humanity a diaspora? Are we all, as it says, flying outward, alone and forever separate? To me, this begs the question, are humans naturally in connection with each other? Is that our default state, or is it something that takes maintenance? Does it take effort? Or is it both, right? Even if it's our default state, does it take effort to maintain? And so I was thinking, my question would be, if that is humanity's natural state, then why do so many of the structures created in the world, whether it be capitalism, feudalism, fascism, even war is a system, why are all these systems seemingly designed to disrupt connection or make it more difficult. And so I think that's really the theme that's being got at here, is the inherent connection of humanity, and it's questioning why we've designed a world that makes that connection so difficult. Continuing that theme of dehumanization of war. And we have Pointsman here, who is too proud, and maybe there's an element of toxic masculinity in it, to ever show genuine affection to this person who he actually holds very dear. Yeah, it's really cool, a lot going on there. Okay. So this is the same scene. It's no longer, they're no longer in conversation, but this is right at the end of that scene with Pointsman and Gwenhydwy. Later, toward dusk, several enormous water bugs, a very dark reddish brown, emerge like elves from the wainscoting and go lumbering toward the larder. Pregnant mother bugs, too, with baby translucent outrider bugs flowing along like a convoy escort. At night, in the very late silences between bombers, ack-ack fire and falling rockets, they can be heard, loud as mice, munching through Gwenhydwy's paper sacks, leaving streaks and footprints of shit the color of themselves behind. They don't seem to go in much for soft things, fruits, vegetables, and such. It's more the solid lentils and beans they're into, stuff they can gnaw at, paper and plaster barriers, hard interfaces to be pierced, for they're agents of unification, you see. Christmas bugs. They were deep in the straw of the manger at Bethlehem. They stumbled, climbed, fell glistening red among a golden lattice of straw that must have seemed to extend miles up and downward, an edible tenement world, now and then gnawed through to disrupt some mysterious sheaf of vectors that would send neighbor bugs tumbling ass over antennas down past you as you held on with all legs in that constant tremble of golden stalks. A tranquil world, the temperature and humidity staying nearly steady, the day's cycle dampened to only a soft, easy sway of light, gold to antique gold to shadows and back again. The crying of the infant reached you, perhaps, as bursts of energy from the invisible distance, nearly unsensed, often ignored. Your savior, you see. So here, as I discussed in the last video, Pynchon is often working with binaries or opposites, and the relationship between the two. Here we have the relationship between the profane and the sacred, right? The dirty and the nasty and the holy. And we talked about that last video with the quote in the church where it described the group of men singing as this, smelly, irreverent, kind of gross group, but they're singing these beautiful hymns, right? So then you have their beauty and the grotesque, right? The profane and the sacred, and that's the same thing that's going on here. I do believe that the water bugs here, right, the big cockroaches, are a metaphor for the preterite, right, the common people. I think what tells me that is that he uses you, right, the second person directly, talks to us, the reader, as if we are the bugs, right? You would go tumbling down, whatever it said. The crying of the infant reached you. So we have these bugs who, as described, are ignorant of the world around them and exist in a sort of dream state. And that could be kind of the daily humdrum that keeps the common person from thinking too hard about his station in life. But they're also present at the birth of Jesus, which, again, gives them this sort of elevated status. And if you think about the story of Jesus itself, right, even without the introduction of cockroaches, the fact that he's born in a manger, in a barn, the whole point of that was that he was a common person, right, a king born among farm animals. And so this is just kind of expanding on the themes that are already there in the Bible, where, Jesus is not born in a throne room, he's not born to royalty, he's born to common folks in a barn. And so you have here implying that there were cockroaches climbing around in the straw, and it kind of presents it as beautiful, even though there's obviously that kind of gross imagery of the cockroaches and their dirt and excrement that they leave behind. So that's what we have here, is a kind of the marriage, the interlocking, the interdependence of the profane and the sacred, right? The profane in this book is sacred, and there is quite some profanity. So I also think it's interesting that it specifies that the bugs are into chewing through hard stuff. Right? The lentils and beans they can gnaw at, hard interfaces to be pierced. He calls them agents of unification. And maybe what I think that means, if I had to take a stab at it, is that the common people, right, the cockroaches, whatever you want to call them, are sort of meant to pierce this veil, and maybe that this this commonness, this profanity, this grotesqueness, whatever, maybe that's what's necessary to reach the sacred. Maybe you have to commune with the very dirt, the very essence of humanity or of the world in order to reach the sacred. Maybe it's not found in chapels and, golden throne rooms. Yeah, it's very interesting. So we've moved on to a different scene now. We have Roger and Jessica visiting with family, and it's not clear whose family. They're called Uncle Roger and Aunt Jessica, but obviously we know they're not married. They're not together officially, so it's unclear if this little girl we're about to see is Roger's niece or Jessica's niece. It's not clear, but it doesn't really matter. But all we know is that Penelope, this little girl, is in her room, and she sees, or feels rather, her father sitting in his old chair, and he's dead. So she's being haunted by this ghost of her father. Demonic possessions in this house are not unknown. Is this really Keith, her father? Taken when she was half her present age, and returned now as not the man she knew, but only the shell, with the soft, meaty slug of soul that smiles and loves, that feels its mortality, either rotted away or been picked at by the needle mouths of death by government, process by which living souls unwillingly become the demons known to the main sequence of Western magic as the Qliphoth, shells of the dead. It is also what the present dispensation often does to decent men and women entirely on this side of the grave. In neither process is there any dignity or any mercy. Mothers and fathers are conditioned into deliberately dying in certain preferred ways, giving themselves cancer and heart attacks, getting into motor accidents, going off to fight in the war, leaving their children alone in the forest. They'll always tell you fathers are taken, but fathers only leave. That's what it really is. The fathers are all covering for each other, that's all. Perhaps it's even better to have this presence, rubbing the room dry as glass, slipping in and out of an old chair, than a father who still hasn't died yet, a man you love and have to watch it happening to. So I feel like a broken record at this point, but it's obviously about dehumanization, what the war does to a person, right? It takes the meaty slug of soul that smiles and loves, that feels its mortality, and rots away or gets picked at by the needle mouths of death by government. Here we see literal death, right? A father who has physically died and is no longer with his daughter, to the dehumanization that happens under the war. So you have death by government, right, where they actually work themselves to death or go off to fight in the war and die. And then you have living souls becoming the shells of the dead, right? Essentially just a walking corpse. Someone who's been stripped of their humanity, who no longer is this loving parent. And it kind of asks, is it better for them to be actually dead, to be taken from you literally, or for everything that makes them to be taken from them and just to have them continue walking around dying a slow, miserable death? You also have this, again, the repetition of loss of innocence. Penelope is apparently pretty experienced at communicating with her dead father, and that, that shouldn't be the way a 9-year-old interacts with a parent. It's very tragic. there's also this element of willing self-destruction, right? So over here it says living souls unwillingly become demons or shells of the dead. But then here it says they'll always tell you fathers are taken, but fathers only leave. And so that begs the question, is this misery under the war, is this all this unnecessary death, is this preferable to some people to the much more nuanced difficulty of raising a child, or you could even say being in a relationship, right? There's so much clarity when you're working for the war, right? You just follow your orders, you contribute what needs to be done to win the war, to beat the enemy, but then you go home and dealing with people, right? The people you love is often much more complicated. So I'm not sure I see a ton of that willing disconnect in the characters here, but it's certainly a possibility that's just implied rather than outright stated. So the next quote actually starts on the same page, and it's Roger bemoaning that the love of his life is married to someone else. If the rockets don't get her, they're still her lieutenant. Damned Beaver/Jeremy is the war. He is every assertion the fucking war has ever made. That we are meant for work and government, for austerity, and these shall take priority over love, dreams, the spirit, the senses, and the other second-class trivia that are found among the idle and mindless hours of the day. Damn them, they are wrong. They are insane. Jeremy will take her like the angel itself, in his joyless, weasel-worded come-along, and Roger will be forgotten. An amusing maniac, but with no place in the rationalized power ritual that will be the coming peace. She will take her husband's orders. She will become a domestic bureaucrat, a junior partner, and remember Roger, if at all, as a mistake thank God she didn't make. Oh, he feels a raving fit coming on. How the bloody hell can he survive without her? She is the British worm that protects his stooping shoulders, and the wintering sparrow he holds inside his hands. She is his deepest innocence in spaces of bough and hay, before wishes were given a separate name to warn that they might not come true, and his lithe Parisian daughter of joy. Beneath the eternal mirror, forswearing perfumes, cape skin to the armpits, all that is too easy for his impoverishment and more worthy love. You go from dream to dream inside me. You have passage to my last shabby corner, and there among the debris you found life. I'm no longer sure which of all the words, images, dreams, or ghosts are yours and which are mine. It's past sorting out. We're both being someone new now, someone incredible. So we have more of this really beautiful tenderness, right? This conception of love for Roger that's very all-encompassing, that's very poetic, and just it seems genuine, right? And I have no doubt that Roger's feelings are genuine, just like Jessica's feelings are genuine. But I think with how he talks about Jeremy Beaver, right? Beaver/Jeremy. I think the way he talks about her husband is kind of indicative of what's actually going on, which is the ennoblement, the poeticizing, the romanticizing of an affair, right? It's an act that hurts people. It's a betrayal of trust. It's something that's kind of nasty and unpleasant to think about. But to him, right, Roger, Jessica's husband, is a personification of the system itself, right? The war which dehumanizes them, which asks them to be automatons, right? And I think we see here that Roger is a little more naive than Jessica, right? In the last video, there is a scene where Jessica is laying with Roger, and she recognizes internally that what they have can't last forever, and she just chooses to enjoy the present moment, whereas Roger here, he's clinging on, right? He can't even stomach the fact that it's going to end, and he sees the war, right, this kind of state of chaos and difficulty as the one thing that's keeping them together, right? When he says when the peace comes, she'll go do what her husband says. So again, we have the ennoblement of the affair, which connects to that idea we talked about in the last video, nature versus form. The nature of this relationship is loving and genuine, if we're to believe Roger, but the form of it is an affair. And so can true, genuine, beautiful, enriching, nourishing love really come from a betrayal of trust? Because that's what it is at its core. It doesn't give us an answer to that. I don't think it can be the basis of a true loving relationship. I think there's always going to be that betrayal at the heart of it. And we also have to ask, is Roger right here? Is he right that Jeremy is worse for Jessica, that he's more controlling, and that her life will be boring and humdrum after Roger leaves? Is he right in that assertion, or is he just being selfish? It's a lot of questions here. It's just a really complex relationship. So we moved on to the second section of the book now. Slothrop is at a casino called the Casino Hermann Göring. Göring being a high-ranking Nazi officer. I believe it was named that during the German occupation of France, and now it's a free zone. So he's at this casino, ostensibly on leave, but they're really studying him. But he's wasted right now with the scientist, and this is them going outside to get out of the party. Holy shit. This is the kind of sunset you hardly see anymore. A 19th century wilderness sunset, a few of which got set down, approximated on canvas, landscapes of the American West by artists nobody ever heard of, when the land was still free and the eye innocent, and the presence of the Creator much more direct. Here it thunders now over the Mediterranean, high and lonely, this anachronism in primal red, in yellow purer than can be found anywhere today, a purity begging to be polluted. Of course, empire took its way westward. What other way was there but into those virgin sunsets to penetrate and to foul? So here we have more talk about colonialism. I believe there's going to be quite a bit more of that in this video. It's talking about colonialism, imperialism, westward expansion as corruption, something ignoble and gross, right? Taking the free and innocent and fouling it. That's the language used. The fact that we use the word innocent here connects it to the already discussed themes of the loss of innocence in children. Right, we had in the first video the girl the building collapsed on. In this one we have Penelope seeing the ghost of her father. And here innocence is used to talk about land, to talk about the American continent, and how that innocence was destroyed by empire, right? First Spaniards and then much of the rest of Europe. There's also the connection of purity, sexual purity, to colonialism, a purity begging to be polluted. I don't think those words, innocence, purity, I don't think those are accidental. I think they're very purposeful connections to, like I said, the innocence of childhood and sexual purity. Like I spoke about in the first video a little bit, there's a lot of sexual domination in this book. I don't talk about a lot of those scenes directly because I don't want to, but here it's being directly connected to colonialism, and I think that's a really cool idea, and it'll get expanded on more in the coming quotes. So this now is in a lab. It's in the ARF lab, which is Pointsman's, conditioning lab. And what's just happened on this prior page is that there was a little scene where all the mice in their cages got out and started doing a little song and dance number. So Pynchon has a lot of little weird asides and tangents like that. But this is the paragraph that comes when we're back in reality. They have had their moment of freedom. Webley has only been a guest star. Now it's back to the cages and the rationalized forms of death. Death in the service of the one species cursed with the knowledge that it will die. I would set you free if I knew how, but it isn't free out here. All the animals, the plants, the minerals, even other kinds of men are being broken and reassembled every day to preserve an elite few who are the loudest to theorize on freedom, but the least free of all. I can't even give you hope that it will be different someday, that they will come out and forget death and lose their technology's elaborate terror and stop using every other form of life without mercy to keep what haunts men down to a tolerable level, and be like you instead, simply here, simply alive. So much like with the cockroaches, it's pretty clear that the rats or the mice here are being used as a stand-in for the preterite, the people who are taken advantage of. We talk about all the time these systems that are put into place. Colonialism, the war, capitalism, industrialism. And here those are described, all these systems, as rationalized forms of death. These things that we create, right, just like we talked about with the coal and the coal tar in the last video, being transformed into steel for tanks, right? Just because we make something pretty or efficient or beneficial, right, doesn't change what it is. Right? Under these systems, people are taken advantage of, animals, plants, the earth is being taken advantage of, and so it's really just another form of death. The other thing I think is interesting here is that there seems to be a slight little touch of sympathy for the elite, right? The people who create the systems and take advantage of people. It calls them the least free of all. And so, what does that mean? That these people that we are railing against here, that we hate, that are causing all this suffering, are the least free of all. And I don't really know. I don't know what to think about that. But it's a weird kind of additional dimension to how this book looks at this relationship, where it's not simply, there are these preterite people that are being taken advantage of and murdered and killed, genocided, worked to death, whatever. There's just them, and then these evil, conniving elite who are pure evil. There's nothing under there. I think here it kind of implies that they don't have a choice. That maybe there's something inherent in society or humanity where there's always going to be these people that, for one reason or another, maybe for their own protection or because they have some deficiency in their character, feel like they have to exploit and conquer. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think? You know who I'm talking to. Okay, we're back with Slothrop now. He's escaped the casino, and he's on the run from the people who are trying to track him, control him. He's under an assumed identity. He's a British soldier named Ian Scuffling, a war correspondent, I believe, actually. So he's found a hotel, he's sleeping, and he's hiding out. And we have this scene. Just before dawn, knocking comes very loud, hard as steel. Slothrop has the sense, this time, to keep quiet. Come on, open up. MPs, open up. American voices, country voices, high-pitched and without mercy. He lies freezing, wondering if the bed springs will give him away. For possibly the first time he is hearing America as it must sound to a non-American. Later, he will recall that what surprised him most was the fanaticism, the reliance not just on flat force but on the rightness of what they planned to do. He'd been told long ago to expect this sort of thing from Nazis, and especially from Japs. We were the ones who always played fair, But this pair outside the door now are as demoralizing as a close-up of John Wayne, the angle emphasizing how slanted his eyes are. Funny you never noticed that before. Screaming bonsai. I think this is an idea that I'm super fascinated in. This points to, right, the history is written by the victors, a very common saying. When you learn about the war, World War II specifically, you hear all about the United States and England, the Allies, as the good guys. Right, the moral force guiding the world back to rightness. And, you know, by some accounts that is true, right? Germany, Hitler, they were the bad guys. But I believe we spoke about this a little in the last video, that America committed maybe we didn't. Either way, America has, either during World War II or before that, had committed a lot of the same war crimes as Germany committed. The internment camps for Japanese Americans, eugenics, right? Eugenics is actually a program that Hitler got the idea for from America. So there's this kind of moral rot in American culture that we don't really hear about. And here we have pointed out this idea of American exceptionalism, where Americans are kind of taught to believe that their country is exceptional in its uprightness and morality, in its achievement. And I love this phrase here, for possibly the first time he's hearing America as it must sound to a non-American, right? It's brash, it's loud, it's fanatical. And I think that's a super interesting angle. There's almost this delusional self-assurance, right, in these American soldiers. America, which is just as much an imperialist country as Germany or Russia. Yeah, and this thing here, John Wayne, screaming bonsai. I believe this is referencing when John Wayne was cast as Genghis Khan in a movie. And it may be he was cast in another thing as some kind of Asian character, another Asian character, but that's the one I'm familiar with, is where they had John Wayne, a white American actor, cast as this Mongolian warrior. So demoralizing as a close-up of John Wayne is, you know, when you get a close-up look at American culture, there's all these blemishes, right, that make it not quite as noble and beautiful as it may have seemed to you. Okay, we're still with Slothrop here. He is met with an Argentinian correspondent, and the Argentinian is telling him about colonialism in his own country. In the days of the gauchos, my country was a blank piece of paper. The pampas stretched as far as men could imagine, inexhaustible, fenceless. Wherever the gaucho could ride, that place belonged to him. But Buenos Aires sought hegemony over the provinces. All the neuroses about property gathered strength and began to infect the countryside. Fences went up, and the gaucho became less free. It is our national tragedy. We are obsessed with building labyrinths where before there was an open plain and sky, to draw ever more complex patterns on the blank sheet. We cannot abide that openness. It is terror to us. Look at Borges. Look at the suburbs of Buenos Aires. The tyrant Rosas has been dead a century, but his cult flourishes. Beneath the city streets, the warrens of rooms and corridors, the fences and the networks of steel track, the Argentine heart, in its perversity and guilt, longs for a return to that first unscribbled serenity, that anarchic oneness of pampas and sky. So, just like that passage about the American sunset, right? Pre-colonialism, it reiterates this contrast between pre-colonialism, which is defined as freedom, serenity, innocence, openness, and post-colonialism, which is defined as control, confusion, right? The labyrinth and tragedy. there's this notion that control, the fences, right? Slothrop mentions barbed wire later. Controlling the frontier, it likens that to death. Again, going back to the coal tars turning into steel, human control almost never results in more life. You could say that there are fields of science which are dedicated to the preservation of human life, and I would grant that too, but I think the focus on this book is on the science that by and large has led to more destruction, more control, less freedom, more death. If you don't know, gaucho is an Argentinian cowboy. It's just their word for cowboy. It's challenging the notion. This book, in a lot of ways, but especially in this passage, is challenging the notion that progress, for the sake of progress, is a good thing. Again, there are ways in which progress is a good thing, right? Social progress, medical science progress, those are good things, we could say, but it challenges the idea that progress is an unadulterated good, because it leads to so much death and lack of freedom. As I mentioned in the first video, there were a couple passages which, on my first attempt to read through this book, just stuck in my mind, and this is another one of those. Okay, Slothrop is on the run still, and he is riding a train in a boxcar with a bunch of other displaced people. So this is a displaced person's song. If you see a train this evening, far away against the sky, lie down in your wooden blanket, sleep and let the train go by. Trains have called us every midnight from 1,000 miles away. Trains that pass through empty cities, trains that have no place to stay. No one drives the locomotive, no one tends the staring light. Trains have never needed riders, trains belong to bitter night. Railway stations stand deserted, rights of way lie clear and cold. What we left them trains inherit, trains go on and we grow old. Let them cry like cheated lovers, let their cries find only wind. Trains are meant for night and ruin, we are meant for song and sin. So I think here trains are stand in for industrialization or technological progress. I think we see them personified as this almost apocalyptic force. There's this idea that trains will go on even after all the people are gone. And it paints them as kind of opposed to human passion, right? Trains are meant for night and ruin. We are meant for song and sin. Song and sin, right? Debauchery, enjoyment, fun, passion. It paints technological progress as an opposition to that. But I think there's also this contradictory note in progress, as the need for humanity is lessened. This progress ceases to be for anyone. Right? I think about that a lot with the kind of technological progress we're seeing today. For instance, with generative AI, right? This notion that it will destroy the need for anyone to work a job or make art or do anything. You don't have to write your emails anymore. You don't have to flirt anymore. ChatGPT will do it all for you. And I'm just asking, who is this for? The companies like it because they may be able to make money off of it. Not yet, but in the future. But if we outsource art, music, writing, everything, if we outsource all the jobs, all the passion to AI, what place is there for humanity anymore? So I just think it's really interesting that a theme like this is, Pynchon's talking about it in the 70s in a book set in the 40s, and it's still relevant today. Here we have the most probably direct criticism of colonialism. In the last video, we had that passage about the dodo hunter as a metaphor for colonialism, right? Just a little bit ago we had those quotes from about the American frontier and control of the Argentinian pampas. But this is a very direct statement on what Pynchon thinks about colonialism. Colonies are the outhouses of the European soul, where a fellow can let his pants down and relax, enjoy the smell of his own shit, where he can fall on his slender prey, roaring as loud as he feels like, and guzzle her blood with open joy, eh? Where he can just wallow in rut and let himself go in a softness, a receptive darkness of limbs, of hair as woolly as the hair on his own forbidden genitals, where the poppy and cannabis and coca grow full and green, and not to the colors and style of death, as do ergot and agaric, the blight and fungus native to Europe. Christian Europe was always death, Carl, death and repression. Out and down in the colonies, life can be indulged, life and sensuality in all its forms, with no harm done to the metropolis, nothing to soil those cathedrals, white marble statues, noble thoughts. No word ever gets back. The silences down here are vast enough to absorb all behavior, no matter how dirty, how animal it gets. So Pynchon is saying extremely explicitly here that this pretension to moral superiority, to civilization, that developed countries often have is just a total farce, right? We keep our metropolis, right? Our cathedrals, our white marble statues, our noble thoughts, we keep those nice and pure, and then we go out and we conquer and we pillage and we destroy and we control and we enslave, right? There's no actual moral superiority, right? There's this notion sometimes that European countries or any colonial imperial country must civilize the savage, and I think what is clear here is that there is no civilizing to be done, right? Because we can view them as savages all we want, but that doesn't change the fact that we do terrible things to them and are just as savage as we make them out to be. With the dichotomy I mentioned between death and control and the colors black and white, we have another mention here with the white marble statues, right? This idea that white, which we see as the opposite of death, right? This facsimile of purity, of civilization, is just another form of death. Where he says very directly, Christian Europe was always death, Carl, death and repression. Just because we hide or suppress these urges, these reprehensible behaviors, does not mean that they're not there, right? So here, I don't think I've talked about them before in these videos, but this will be your introduction in the video to Enzian and the Herreros. I know I'm not pronouncing that right probably, but they are an African diaspora. Enzian was a victim of enslavement and exploitation under Captain Blicero, who is a German captain, and now he's free and leading his people in kind of open rebellion. They're looking for the rocket to try and make their own. So here we have this group of Herreros, and this passage is about Enzian's kind of perspective on colonialism. His tribe believed long ago that each sunset is a battle. In the north, where the sun sets, live the one-armed warriors, the one-legged and one-eyed, who fight the sun each evening, who spear it to death until its blood runs out over the horizon and sky. But under the earth, in the night, the sun is born again, to come back each dawn, new and the same. But we, zone Herreros, under the earth, how long will we wait in this north, this locus of death? Is it to be reborn? Or have we really been buried for the last time, buried facing north like all the rest of our dead, and like all the holy cattle ever sacrificed to the ancestors? North is death's region. There may be no gods, but there is a pattern. Names by themselves may have no magic, but the act of naming, the physical utterance, obeys the pattern. Nordhausen means dwellings in the north. The rocket had to be produced out of a place called Nordhausen. The town adjoining was named Bleicherode as a validation, a bit of redundancy so that the message would not be lost. The history of the old Herreros is one of the lost messages. It began in mythical times when the sly hare who nests in the moon brought death among men, instead of the moon's true message. The true message has never come. Perhaps the rocket is meant to take us there some day, and then Moon will tell us its truth at last. There are those down in the Erdschweinhöhle, younger ones who've only known white autumn-prone Europe, who believe Moon is their destiny. But older ones can remember that Moon, like Njambi Kurunga, is both the bringer of evil and its avenger. And Enzians found the name Bleicherode close enough to Blicker, the nickname the early Germans gave to death. They saw him white, bleaching in blankness. The name was later Latinized to Dominus Blissero. Weissmann, enchanted, took it as his SS code name. Enzian was in Germany by then. Weissmann brought the new name home to his pet, not showing it off so much as indicating to Enzian yet another step to be taken toward the rocket, toward a destiny he still cannot see past this sinister cryptography of naming, a sparse pattern but one that harshly will not be denied, that cries and nags him on, stumbling as badly as 20 years ago. So I love the kind of creation myth, this mythology that we get from Enzian's people. And we see here that white is directly likened to death. Bleicherode, the translation is bleached clearing, right? So that clearly has to do with white. It talks here about Blicker, the nickname early Germans gave to death, bleaching and blankness. Dominus Blissero, that is, Weissmann is Captain Blissero, and he's the one that captured Enzian. It's a very clear parallel, right? White is death, right? The moon is white, and this character, again, I apologize for the mispronunciation, Njambi Kurunga, is both the bringer of evil and its avenger. So this idea being, right, connecting the disparate parts, the opposite ends of the spectrum, connecting death and life, or maybe justice if you want to say. But white here is clearly used to indicate death. And this is actually really interesting. There's a lot of connections to white and death. In Moby Dick, there's a whole chapter on the evilness of the color white, right? The white whale is the principal antagonist in the book. Blood Meridian, Judge Holden, who's kind of this embodiment of evil, death, colonialism, domination, is said to be perfectly albino, right? Pure white. I want to write an essay on this, but I need to get my thoughts together more. I think the main thing that I find interesting is that you have here a colonized people, right? Enzian, who's black, he's African. And he and his people conceptualize death as white. And that connects really interestingly to colonialism, mostly perpetrated by white people on people of darker skin. And so if I write an essay, that's kind of going to be the core idea. There's also a little a detail here that I think is not spoken about as often when we talk about genocide. We think about literal genocide, right? The killing of a race of people. But here we have an example of cultural genocide. Right? The history of the old Herreros is one of lost messages, meaning things that were maybe taken from them or misconstrued. And that connects to this idea that colonialism, even if it doesn't mean literal genocide, actual murder of the people, often extinguishes culture and cultural memory. Right? A great example of that is the indigenous people of the United States and Canada, but indigenous people everywhere, obviously. I just know more about the indigenous people of North America. So many of their languages, their customs, their traditions were lost because of the murder and the forced assimilation into a more European culture, right? And it's that part is just as tragic, I think, as the rest of it. Back with Slothrop now. He's found himself a little date this girl, this woman he's been sleeping with, and they're in Germany, and their relationship is actually pretty sweet. There's obviously this notion of them kind of using each other for comfort in the war, but they have some really beautiful conversations, and I don't know. It's a complicated thing, but they're sitting here out as the sun is rising, and there's this description here. God shadows. Slothrop raises an arm. His fingers are cities, his biceps is a province. Of course he raises an arm. Isn't it expected of him? The arm shadow trails rainbows behind as it moves, reaching eastward for a grab at Göttingen. Not ordinary shadows either, three-dimensional ones, cast out on the German dawn. Yes, and Titans had to live in these mountains or under them, impossibly out of scale, never to be carried by a river, never to look to a horizon and think that it might go on forever. No trees to climb, no long journeys to take. Only their deep images are left, haloed shells lying prone above the fogs men move in. So it's dawn, and the sun is just coming up over the horizon, and Gelly is showing him this place where if you sit there at just the right time, your shadow stretches across this whole valley. And I just love the imagery here. It's just amazing. But I think if I had to look past this beautiful imagery, I think what's going on here under the surface is, if not sympathy, then at the very least a possible explanation for the depravity of the elite, right? The cruelty of them. It talks about Titans here, these impossibly large beings, never to be carried by a river, never to look to a horizon and think that it might go on forever. All these things are stating that it's almost sympathetic to these beings, these consciousnesses who are essentially too big to achieve anything, right? There's nothing out of reach for them, so there's nothing to make them happy, I think, right? If you're the most powerful being in the universe, if you're impossibly large, right, what could you get out of climbing a mountain? What could you get out of taking a journey, right? It's one step and you're there. So there's this idea maybe that once someone achieves a certain level of power, that phrase absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? Maybe the only thing left for them to do is to be cruel, to take advantage of people, right? There's nothing left to achieve for them. So I wouldn't say it's sympathetic, but it at least is this window maybe into the psychology of it. Super interesting idea. Okay, this is the last quote I have for this video. It's a brief one. They're talking about the synthesizing of painkillers, right? Opioids, that kind of thing. And they have come to this conclusion that there is no way to create a pain medication that is not addictive. So, it says, results have not been encouraging. We seem up against a dilemma built into nature, much like the Heisenberg situation. There is a nearly complete parallelism between analgesia and addiction. The more pain it takes away, the more we desire it. It appears we can't have one property without the other, any more than a particle physicist can specify position without suffering an uncertainty as to the particle's velocity. So I don't know entirely what to make of this, but I thought it was an interesting question. So there's just this idea that we can't achieve analgesia without also creating addiction. And I have, I guess, two main ideas what this could really be about. I think broadly it could be speaking about the inability for science to bring benefits to the world without exacting a price. Right? Analgesia, pain killing, is a good thing, but we can't create that without creating addictive substances. I think about how a lot of medical advancements come from data that we got from very unethical experiments or studies. I think about how NASA, after the war, hired Nazi scientists to work on the rockets that would go to the moon, right? These people who committed unspeakable acts and, then achieved fame and success in America. So maybe that's what it's about. I think it could also maybe be about the inherent misery of being a human. There's this notion that if we can avoid the pain, how could we not be addicted to it? Because there is so much suffering in life, right? I don't know. It's an interesting question, and I had never thought about that relationship between analgesia and addiction. I wonder if with modern science, if they've made anything. Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, that's the last quote I have for this video. There will be one more video, as you can see. Yeah, just tons of cool stuff here. A lot of colonialism in this one. But that's, I think, mainly, maybe one of the main things the book's about. Yeah. Well, I look forward to finishing the quotes in the next video. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, see you later.